Hello, let's unpack the 2023 VCE English Examiners Report together. So, hi, first of all, my name is Launa from LaunaTutors. Some of you already know me, but if you don't, nice to meet you. I got a 97 ATAR and a 44 in English, and I'm a VCE English tutor. I've been doing it for a long time. I also create resources and I create content specifically for VCE English. So hit that follow button, follow me on TikTok, check out my website, www.launatutors.com, and nice to meet you. Today we're going to be going through the VCE English Examiners Report, which every year they release an examiner's report of the exam, which is basically the VCA examiners telling us what they noticed in the exam, what the year 12s did well, what they didn't do well, sample pieces from students that did particularly well, some statistics, and we're just going to go through that because it's a really good way to keep in mind how you can improve a cohort from the previous years. So let's get started. By the way, if you'd like more VCE English exam preparation help, grab my VCE English exam preparation workshop recording plus 2 PDF workbooks. That helps pace you through to the end of the year, and it goes through VCA criteria, preparation, and skill building, and to follow along for the workshop so that you're actually doing something while watching the workshop. You're actually practicing what I'm telling you. So it's not just I'm telling you certain things, it's I'm telling you this is how you can actually put it into action. And so you walk into the exam feeling more confident and feeling like, I know the VCA criteria, I understand what's going on, I'm prepared, and I have the skills to approach the exam. Also study guides for high ground, we have Always Lived in the Castle, argument analysis, and I have a ton of free and paid resources. Just check out my TikTok for free advice, check out my website for other free and paid resources you can download, and check out my YouTube obviously, but there's just so much that I'm putting out there, so take a look at everything. We're gonna go through this together. So the general comments in 2023, about 40,000 students sat the VCE English exam. Now, we're just going to ignore section B because in 2023, that was a comparative. That's completely different for you guys. You have a new study design, so don't worry about that. All right, now let's talk about the general observations for improvement, right? This is just over everything, and we will talk about the specifics soon, but let's go through the general stuff first. So the first point is, while most students recognize the key terms in the topics of section A, a number were unable to identify and respond to those elements of the topics that narrowed the scope of the task. And aside from that, so what that is telling me as a tutor is that some of you guys are not specific enough, you're not unpacking the prompt and unfolding the potential, you're not exploring different ideas in regards to the prompt, right? A lot of the times, what I'll see, especially in my TikTok or YouTube comment section, are students who are like, I'm just going to pre-write an essay and check it in and hope it works. And that ain't going to work. I'm sorry, but for section 8, that's not how you're going to score high. A big part of a text response is responding directly to the prompt, right? And so a lot of you guys wrote in a general way to the key idea of the topic. So if the prompt is something like, oh, something to do with classism, a lot of you guys will copy and paste something that you've written in your notes about classism when it's like, no, you need to actually directly respond to the prompts. A lot of the time, it's never going to ask you, oh, where is classism present, right? Or write about classism. A lot of the time, it's going to give you an opinion and it's going to ask you to explore it, right? And you need to directly respond to the prompt. It's like me asking you a question, and it's like me asking you, what is the time? And you say, oh, it's Tuesday. That technically is a time, correct, but it's not responding specifically enough to the question I'm asking, right? If I ask you, how do you feel about the VCE English exam? And you respond and say, the VCE English exam is on the 29th of October, and it is an exam that 40,000 students sit every year or something like that. That still doesn't properly answer the question, even though you are definitely talking about the VCE English exam. So be sure to be specific and unpack the topic, the prompt you're given in a specific way. Look at the subject matter, look at the keywords, and look at the task words. Another thing, many students were able to identify ideas that the author was conveying and use these for a basis in their paragraphs. Some students struggled to explain how they had developed this reading of the text. This is just telling me that you guys are not justifying your evidence or claims. Sometimes students, a lot of you guys know exactly what you're talking about, but you don't know how to justify it. So you might make a claim like, this character represents greed, which is probably right. You interpreted it that way because you are a reader and have a brain, but The examiners don't know that. They're wondering, how did you come to this conclusion? And so when you say something like that, you need to justify it with this character represents green because they are commonly associated with this color, green, which is associated with blah, 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 blah. This character there are three particular key moments where the character depicts that they choose greed and money over everything else in their value system. But you need to actually justify how you've developed an interpretation of that text and how you've developed that interpretation specifically. Another thing is students are encouraged to explain how they have interpreted textual elements to create a reading of the text, and how the interplay of the elements adds the complexity of their understanding and the values the author was presenting. That's a lot of words, but textual elements is basically context, setting, themes, symbols, motifs, characters, like literary devices. There are so many different little things that you can reference to justify it, right? It's not, ooh, textual elements. If you can gather more than one element to justify a claim or opinion you have, that's amazing. The color thing, that is a literary device, right? And then the events, that is literal scenes that were written out, literal moments that were written out, characters' actions. Those are two different textual elements. You add them together, it creates a stronger foundation for your claim. Fluency and precision were highly valued. Dictionaries were a useful tool, especially in reading time. Bring your dictionaries. But fluency and precision, fluency is just how well you write. Precision is conciseness. So you're not waffling, is what it's saying. Fluency, I recommend you check out my signpost document, because that will help you figure out how to write concise paragraphs, right? Make sure that each sentence you write has a purpose. And the precision, you just go through your old essays and stuff and cross out anything that's unnecessary or repetitive, because that is going to negatively impact how precise your writing is. Basically, it's asking you to write well and write with a purpose. Section C, you understood the need to analyze the argument presented, but you struggled to see in which ways language were used to support and reinforce the ideas presented by writers. You viewed this as separate elements of the text rather than interconnected elements. Yep, that sounds about right. So instead of listing every single language device that you see, what you need to do is connect the function of the language device to the author's contention and purpose, right? The whole point of using language devices, visual techniques, etc., is to support an argument, is to better convey an idea, is to persuade the audience. There is a purpose in it, and you need to link the device and the function of the language device to the author's intent, and the intended effect they want to have on the audience. So don't just list a bunch of pieces of evidence, unpack it and link it. All right, now let's talk about section A, specific information. Let's look at the statistics. So the marks 0 to 10, the average was 5.6. It's not bad. And you'll notice that 1% of exam takers got a 0, 1% got a 1. So what that's telling me is if you literally just show up and write one intro and 3 paragraphs, you are already going to be quite above a lot of these people. Some students don't even show up to the exam day, believe it or not. So if you just show up and study and write for something, you're already going to be landing around here, right? You just need to fight for your life to get to the top. But keep in mind, there are low markers, and it's not that they wrote something so bad that it's a 0 or a 1. It's that they didn't write anything. So you make sure to write something. Prioritize finishing your exam. So some students saw the topic as a contention. I've always been saying this. Some students, when they get the extent to which or agree or whatever, they only agree with the idea and they prove the idea presented rather than engage with it. What examiners want to see? They want to see nuanced viewpoints. They want to see an exploration of ideas. Preferably 3 ideas. Body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3. But they want to see a few different ideas, not just you being like, I so agree with this prompt. It's so right. So stronger responses recognize the text complexity and were able to take a position in relation to the topic shown in the example below. By the way, you should take a look at it yourself and just read the really good samples. For this one, this is about Much Ado. To what extent do you agree? The women in the play have little influence over what happens to them. One of the students wrote, ultimately, the playwright celebrates the efforts of women to obtain some semblance of control, but evinces that in a hegemonic society, it is the men who retain near absolute power. So you see how it shows a nuanced understanding. It isn't just like, you're so right, women really don't have much power over what happens to them. It actually explores a few different aspects like societal power, personal agency, etc. And another point, some responses drew on the text's character as their only evidence, and such responses often imply that characters were used by the author to simply personify a particular static belief or idea. I'm guilty. I love using characters and saying they represent this. Obviously, characters are sewn into the story to represent something, but they're also a person, and you don't represent something and I don't represent one thing, right? We are all nuanced beings, and that cannot be your only evidence for something. Vary your evidence. Don't just say this character, that character, and this character. You want to take note of the setting, the context. You want to take note of certain things that happen. You want to take note of certain symbols and motifs. You want to take note of certain patterns in the story, right? You want to take note of not just the characters, but the character relationships. You want to vary what you use as evidence. And characters are amazing pieces of evidence, but they're also multifaceted and they can be molded or interpreted in ways to support different ideas. So try to vary up how you support your arguments, right? Try to think of other things that happen within your text or film that support different types of ideas. Can limit the discussion in many ways in which authors convey ideas and values. It basically just restricts the author's voice because, again, works are supposed to be interpreted in different ways. It's not just one thing, right? It's what you get out of it. So look at other textual elements is basically what this is saying. Although this is a straightforward way to respond to the topic, it can also limit your capacity to demonstrate an understanding of complex ideas that were communicated in many ways by the writer. So just basically don't box in a character too much. Use an array of textual devices to support your arguments. In 2023, responses on film text referencing cinematic evidence was effectively used. For example, in Sunset, this says, Joe had held the desire for fame since the inception of the film. However, he admits in the end the price ended up being too high, which serves as a right reference to the fact that in order to achieve his ambition of reaching fame, he had been forced to pay with his life. The mid-range shot of Joe in the pool reveals that a series of photographers fighting to get a glimpse of his corpse serves to show that only in death was Joe able to achieve his pursuit of fame, presenting the journey as having an unfortunate ending. So you see how much stronger this piece of character evidence is because it reinforces with a film technique. Also, if you're doing film, you have to reference film techniques. If you don't, you're losing marks. You ain't getting a 10, honey. That's a good example. Good on you for getting into the sample. Good on you, whoever got into the external assessment report piece. Also, here's me and my coconut water. I am not sponsored, so sponsor me. I know it's gross drinking out the bottle, but I'm like, there's like this much left, so I'm just gonna finish it today. Many students included quotes from the text. However, not all students were discriminating in the way that they used them. Some people tacked to the end as proof of their opinion. You're gonna need to unpack your quotes. You're going to need to unpack it. I suggest unpacking it by obviously weaving it into the evidence, but also explaining the context around the quote and then thinking about why was it written like that? Why was it put there? What's the significance of the quote? How does this quote actually support my topic sentence, my argument? And explain it, you know what I mean? Instead of just being like, I think this, here's a quote. That's basically what they're saying. For example, after the victory, Menelaus boasts that the Greeks butchered the Trojans with the gods' help. The description of the Greeks' behavior after the battle implies their callous disregard for human life. The association of the gods with such behavior calls into question the respect that they too deserve. So you see how that actually unpacks the quotes rather than just chucking it in. Remember to unpack it. The examiners love that. It gives you so many more, it helps you get the marks. It helps you meet the criteria. It helps demonstrate that you know how to unpack things. You know where to look at the implications of certain quotes. And just do that. Implications, it reveals a close knowledge of the text. Many responses included a conclusion that summarized the ideas presented. Appropriate. However, responses that could resolve the topic demonstrated a more sophisticated understanding and were more highly rewarded. Basically, your conclusion, if you can make it a response to the prompt, final response to the prompt, highly appreciated. So, for example, in the end, there's a sense that there's reshaping and creative construction of the fact that goes beyond ensuring survival, but allowing one to attain inner peace and closure as blah, 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 blah. But you see how that responds to whatever prompt it was given? It wasn't just like, so I argued this. So in the end, this is my response to the prompt. This is my final closing answer to the prompt. In short, assessors rewarded responses that explore the topic, its implications through sequenced and well-substantiated and fluent explanation of the interpretation of the text. Makes sense to me. And I'm gonna skip section B because lucky you guys, you don't have to do comparatives. So lucky you. That was hard, by the way. I don't know if you guys remember, but comparatives was basically you had to compare two entire texts or a film and a text. And imagine learning double the content for text response and then having to be able to write a piece that demonstrates not only your understanding of both pieces, but your understanding of intertextuality, right? And remembering twice the amount of evidence. But anyways, I still miss comparatives though, low-key. Shout out to Crucible and Dressmaker, besties. It was really fun to do comparative, but it is a lot of work. I'm not actually surprised that section C had less people who got a 0 and a 1, even though the average is the same as section A. And I want to say that it's because more people attempted section C or that more people begin with section C. It is best practice to start your exam with section C. Anyways, the average was still 5.6. I think less people got a 10 compared to section A. So that's an interesting statistic to look at. Anyways, there were levels of complexity built into the material that allowed you to demonstrate different capacities for analysis. All responses were able to discuss the proposal of a music festival. So you all knew what was going on. More capable responses recognized that the proposal was going to impact the community's garden festival. Careful reading enabled insight into how the proposal suggested two festivals be blended. Very insightful reading of the text noted in the way which figurative language associated with gardening and music was used to reinforce the ideas that two festivals would naturally complement one another. So if you haven't looked at the 2023 section C, go take a look. It's what that's talking about, but I will just go through the more general advice right now. Students, please, I am begging you, quite literally, look at the background information. That will secure you at least 2 out of 10 marks, in my opinion, right? Because the background information is where so many things live. Context lives here. It's not letting me highlight. Context, audience lives here. So much lives here. You should definitely take the time to look at the background information box. Don't just skim it, look at it. It has so much information that not only goes into your introduction, but it can also inform the foundations of why the author chose to do something, why the author intends for something to go a certain way or come across a certain way. It helps you understand the authorial intent better because it does give you the context of what the author is doing. So students who read the information carefully and had attention to detail could make connections between the elements and were rewarded for their acuity. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but pay attention, right? Read it carefully, and that's also why I recommend doing section C first, so you can read it a few times during reading time. These are some really good examples of audience and analysis. So go check out the actual thing or just here, screenshot. But I think another thing to note is that it links the insightful analysis to the text purpose. Remember, there is a point of the piece. There is a purpose, and the whole piece is to get you or the audience to do the purpose, right? There is a purpose that needs to be done, and the piece is a persuasive piece because it persuades people to do the purpose thing. That sounds so simplistic. I am using really baby words. Audience, purpose, do, but like, look, it's simple. It's just, you gotta just understand the flow of things. So, it would seem that some schools have developed acronyms, it's me and my acronyms, to help students remember the info that could be used in an intro. Many of these acronyms are scrolled in the margins. That is also what I recommend. It's really cute. So teachers will be delighted with this evidence that students listen to and act upon the advice they're given and these tips that help students under the stress of exams. Yes, I highly recommend doing that. Scroll whatever acronym. I talk about acronyms and stuff in my argument analysis study guide or my argument analysis recorded workshop, so go check those out. Many responses still identify tone in the intro without any consideration of its purpose. Guilty. I used to just chuck in whatever tone and be like, oh, they're very informative tone, they're very aggressive, but tone should be used also as a language device, right? So when you are talking about your evidence and stuff, tone is a piece of evidence too. So that's what it's saying. They don't just want you to be like, the tone is this. They want you to say, because of this tone, enhances XY, or it attempts to enhance XYZ, or attempts to convey the idea that blah, 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 or it supports the credibility, or blah, 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 but something, right? You actually have to analyze it because it is technically a language device. Oh, you will be rewarded for exploring ideas the writers conveyed to the reader and how they conveyed them. So, authorial intent and intended effect, look at my language devices video. It's literally all about that. But if you explain how that effect was achieved, you get rewarded higher marks. A more effective level of analysis saw that using the sequencing of ideas to logically divide their analysis. So some people say beginning, middle, end, which is fair because that is usually how the author develops their argument, but look at also exactly what they're saying in the beginning, the middle, and the end, because that is, they develop their argument throughout the piece, right? They don't just say everything in one paragraph, they develop it. So look at how they begin it, how they continue it, and how they end it. Visual, remember, you need to actually, some people are like, I'm going to leave a whole paragraph to the visual, and to that I say, maybe remember the visual, because in the past, you were expected to compare in the past, now not anymore. So because of that, with the visual, it's a piece of evidence. It's in the text, right? It's not a separate thing. It's not a separate caricature. It's within the text. And so it's something to enhance the text. And so you treat it like a language device, basically. And to use it to, so it's used to support the author's argument. And so you need to draw the connection in which the visual connects to both the writer's idea and use of language. It's another thing in there to persuade the audience, right? So the capacity to explain the connection between the text elements is a sophisticated skill, and the sharp nature of visual analysis is also very important. You have to do the visual. You have to. Again, you will 100% not get a 10 if you don't reference visual. Even if you are the best writer in the world, you are not going to get a 10 out of 10 if you don't reference the visual. Oh, the most popular linguistic feature was the use of inclusive language. So guilty. And okay, the text was framed as inclusive. However, some responses mistakenly suggested the evidence for a claim that could be found in the use of pronoun we. So this part I do agree with. Just because something sounds inclusive doesn't mean it's inclusive. Such a pronoun both includes and excludes. So you need to look at the context of the piece, right? Sometimes inclusive language is used to exclude people. So try to think critically about that. Don't just go, oh, there's the word we. Inclusive language make people feel included. Look at the context of the piece. In this piece, there were a distinction of two groups. You want to think about what the author is trying to say about the two groups. Do we want to combine the two groups? What's going on? Are they addressing the two groups, or are they addressing one group? Are they saying we to actually maybe make us not like the other group more? Try to think about how that is specifically used in that situation. This is also the mistake that people made with my language device video. They looked at it and they copied my definitions word by word and my authorial and intended effects word by word. You don't do that. Everything depends on the context of the piece. The functions I gave you, the authorial intent and intended effect I gave you, that is to deepen your understanding of how language devices work. That is not a replacement for looking at the specific piece and asking yourself what is going on here and how is this specifically used in this situation. In 2023, the areas for improvement are the following. It is important to distinguish between summarizing the arguments and ideas in the text with embedded quotations and purposefully including the quotations to illustrate and explain in specific detail the complex ways in which language was used to position the reader. So essentially just don't if you're going to summarize, that's a summarization. You're not going to get more marks for that. Be succinct if you're trying to regurgitate an argument, but you're going to get your marks from purposefully embedding quotes, purposefully using evidence and analyzing it, right? Regurgitating the article and saying, oh, I understand what they're arguing, that's not going to cut it. What you're trying to do is understand what they're arguing, but most importantly, understand how the author crafts the argument together to get the audience to think a certain way, to persuade the audience. Rather than listing arguments, linguistic features, and features of the visuals, explain the ways in which these elements were used to persuade a specific readership to embrace the idea of a music festival. Absolutely. Do not just list stuff. Do not just observe and go, oh, that's inclusive language. That's an anecdote. That's a this. How are those used in that context to achieve the purpose? How are they used to convey the contention, right? How are they used to further the authorial intent and intended effect? Don't just list stuff, right? You are there to analyze. Avoid analyzing these textual elements if they're independent to the aspects of the texts. What I just said before, don't just list stuff, you need to analyze it. High scoring responses we're able to discuss and explain. These are specific to the 2023 section C, so go read that. But the following were some of the overall qualities of high scoring responses. A clear sense of the range of the target audience. Learn how to identify the target audience. It is never Australians, society, the public. It is always way more specific than that. An understanding of the development of argument and the strategy behind the sequencing and purpose. I should make another video about the sequencing thing because I know how to do that. But just for now, just in shorthand, they are never arguing only one argument throughout the entire piece. The argument develops. There are a few arguments to support a contention. Identify how they begin with argument 1, they continue argument 2, and they go to argument 3, or they conclude something, or they have a call to action. But there's a progression of what they're telling you. There's a progression of what they want from you and what they want you to feel. Discussion of connections across the material. Yep. And sustained purposeful analysis. Analysis is the key here. Remember, they are not looking for a regurgitation of the text they provide you. What they are looking for is your understanding of how the author crafted this persuasive text and your analysis of that. I think that is it. So in essence, what I got from the examiner's report was analysis and specificity, and also little things like background information box, acronyms for section C and for section A. Really look at the task words. Don't just agree with everything, right? Develop your own different opinions that you can use for buddy roll 1, buddy 2, buddy 3. Remember, it's not contradicting yourself if you're exploring, right? You can explore ideas. But I hope that this video helped. I hope that the 2023 examiner's report really touched on a few things that you could work on. If you saw yourself in any of these things to work on, well, I gave you advice for it, and so did the examiner's report. So now you know how to move forward and study and address those weaknesses. But again, check out my resources, VCE exam preparation, workshop recording, plus 2 PDF workbooks, study guides for high ground, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and argument analysis. But I spend a lot of time making my resources. I obviously care about the quality. So let me know if you enjoy the video. But yeah, I'll also have tons of free and paid resources. But at the end of the day, I love tutoring English. What can I say? It's been a while and I'm still a fan. I've tutored 100 students. I've sold like hundreds of resources and I really enjoy this, so I hope that you stay with me on my journey, and please subscribe, please like the video, and please comment if you have any questions or if you enjoyed the video. It really helps with my my YouTube, because I think I'm gonna do more long form content on YouTube just because that's the move, and because YouTube, because I think with the YouTube audience, we have longer attention spans, and like you guys are seeking more long form content and more information through long form content, whereas TikTok, I feel like I need to condense a small piece of information into an even smaller piece of information to retain the attention. Please join my YouTube community, and I really enjoyed making this video. I love reading reports. I love looking at the statistics. Again, another takeaway, if you show up to the exam and you do that section, you are already setting yourself up for success. If you study before the exam, you are setting yourself up for success, right? You will most likely land above a 3 or a 4 with any level of preparation and just actually completing that section. The hard part is getting the score you want, which is 7, 8, 9, 10, right? But just by showing up, you are already putting yourself in a good position. So tell yourself that, especially if you're worried about failing. But yeah, thanks again for watching the video, and good luck for your VCE English exams. Again, check out my resources, message me on IG if you want. I love staying in contact with students, and if you have any questions, again, feel free to ask me. But LaunaTutors out.